I'm in Adelaide. I'm in sunny Adelaide, Tony, and it is actually, the sun's out today, and we've had a month of very difficult weather down here, but the sun is out today.
Good, you'll be looking forward to drying out. And we're joined in the qiCommunity Central by Alison Konicek, who'll be working the equipment. And you can comment and ask questions during this webinar at any time by typing a message in the chat pane in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Then we'll be keeping an eye on that and try and answer all your questions as they may come up. Now, Colin, you've been involved with the Improvement Foundation for some time as CEO. Can you remind us all a bit about who the Improvement Foundation is and what you do?
Yeah, certainly, Tony. Thanks. Look, a lot of people, I can see a lot of the names know a bit about us, but I see some new names there. But look, we're a not-for-profit organisation, obviously Australian-based, and our core focus is on improving, systems within healthcare to improve outcomes. And obviously that's through reduction of, disease and things like that. So we've been largely known for the implementation of the Australian Primary Care Collaboratives program, but also other initiatives like the qiCollabs and now more smaller sort of niche, work that we're undertaking with various groups around Australia. So all of those things, give us the need for really good quality data. If you don't get, data or very sound measurement, which of course data underpins measurement, then the improvement work that we do, we can't measure what we do, and if you can't measure what you do, then that's a real problem with improvement work.
So, so you've had a lot of experience working with general practices and Aboriginal medical services with regard to data and extracting data at practice level from practices. What are some of the key issues that you see regarding data at the moment?
Well, over the period, so we've been doing this now for say 10 years, and there's clearly issues like data quality, but to me that's part of the journey as well. We know that there are improvements to how we can get data out, but effectively if the data coming into the main systems is poor, then that's a problem and needs to be fixed at the root, not necessarily retrospectively tidied up. So our programs tend to focus on how we can actually capture good quality data, and then those systems can use it in the delivery of care. Data ownership is one of the other issues. Our fundamental philosophy on this is the people contributing the data that own the data remain the owners of the data, and we allow the use and sharing of those data as determined by those data owners. But that certainly is an issue. The commercialisation of certainly general practice data and other data is been a bit of a hot topic, but we don't have any of that activity through the Improvement Foundation, and the ownership remains with the original owners. Confidentiality is one of the other issues. I can certainly recall 10 years ago when we started the Australian, or more than that, 11 years ago now, when we started the Australian Primary Care Collaboratives program, and the issue of collecting data nationally on general practice and the conspiracy theory around the potential for that to be used for performance management was, was very high. It's not as sensitive these days, I believe, and but still we maintain the confidentiality of the people contributing the data where they prefer that to be the case. And in most of the improvement activities, that is the case. The identity of the individual participants in that activity remains confidential, but people can track their performance with peers. Privacy obviously is another big matter, and the use of sensitive health information, we need to be very careful with how we treat privacy, and obviously we do adhere to the privacy principles, and we plan to not breach those because that's part of our core business. One of the other problems that we've noticed too is the data silos. It's okay to collect data in a region and analyse data in a region, and you're performing, and that's great for that region. But a lot of programs and initiatives and other activities that people are involved in span greater than a region, and therefore, in our view, really the national approach is the best approach in this regard, because those data silos are very difficult to break down, and whilst I'm sure they have, there are business models around that, like data silos. You know, we prefer to get data into one really well kept and maintained repository so that it can be used across regions without necessarily having those silo issues. But they're probably the key things, Tony, over the 10 years that we've been working with data.
And as you say, Colin, over those 10 years, our traditional approach has been to collate data at the practice level for quality improvement purposes. You feel now that perhaps data can be used at a more individual level or with greater granularity than that?
Certainly, Tony. There's a couple of key things that have, you know, really brought that about. One is, you know, people's appetite, I think, and I guess comfort level with sharing data has got better since we first started this journey. But also the tools in which we can now work with, and the results of the e-health reform that has gone through have now led us to a position where that is now achievable to actually bring into one place patient-level data, protected so that it is private and confidential, but also use it for population health, but other purposes as well, as either the data owners or the individual participants, such as even the consumers, health consumers, might want to use those data across various programs and activities. So the appetite, I believe, is there, and certainly now the sophistication in the technology is there as well.
So we'll talk shortly, Colin, about the technology and the sophistication and the tool that you proposed to use. We're talking about today, Elicio, but first we always begin with asking why. What are we trying to achieve? What are the problems you're trying to solve with the new tools you're developing?
Okay, so this came up when we first started the integrated care work a few years ago, and we had trouble trying to bring together the data from various groups, and this could be pharmacy, hospital, general practice as a classic. And despite the general practitioners' interest in saying, look, I would like to actually work with a cohort of patients that, you know, more intensively to provide them with, you know, a healthcare home model and integrate the care across the system, we effectively had general practitioners starting to track patients in spreadsheets, and of course that just simply adds load to an already busy professional, and we don't want to do that. The enrolment process was also clumsy and cumbersome and difficult around the Privacy Act and program rules and regulations, etc. So this is when we said, well, look, we need another solution to this, and we, you know, commenced discussions with Telstra almost about a year ago now, Telstra Health, and companies specifically within that being CloudMed, and they said, yes, we can actually get this to come about, and we'll talk a little bit more through that. But that's one of the reasons, is to be able to integrate these data in a really safe way, so that the person that needs to work with it, and in this particular case, the general practice may have a chronic disease manager or a general practitioner that's very interested in this work, that they can get the information about the patients at their fingertips in a suitable format, so that he's not looking at one by one or trying to put it in a spreadsheet, trying to bring data from a hospital, and they're really too busy to start to deliver the data. We had problems with hospitals participating in a manual sense. So Telstra Health have committed to bringing this together and undertaking that development risk, albeit I don't believe the technical risk is terribly high these days, but Telstra Health are the ones that look like that they could get the job done.
Certainly when we were working in the integrated care wave locally, it was hard to keep track of patients, who ended up in hospital, how long were they there for, which patients had an event, had an infarct or other cardiovascular, even which patients died, can be hard to keep track of once we move outside, events that happen outside our general practice. So that's interesting, Colin. What's the architecture then that you propose to use in Elicio to bring together some of these various points of clinical data?
Okay, so let's just quickly recap. We'll go through these next slides pretty quickly, but effectively the How we used to do it is we would aggregate data at a health service and we would deliver it to the Improvement Foundation portal in an aggregated sense, so it protected the privacy. Now what we're looking at doing is getting the health service to deliver data actually at the unit level into the Elicio repository, but it'll be protected by the software from a privacy and confidentiality perspective. We also know that we can integrate this solution with hospitals and pharmacy and other data sources as well to get the data into the repository. And in the repository, we know that we can identify unique patients across the system, and that's when we can say, well, within the solution, we're now looking to introduce the concept of enrolment. And that's where we might want to put individual people into particular groups, and they can coexist across groups. So they might be part of an integrated care wave. They may even be part of a quit smoking, a smoking cessation program, for example. But each of those programs and activities has different expectations with regard to the information that they might want back about the activity, and that just places a burden downstream on participants. But what we're saying here is that we can actually start to monitor these now at a very different level and be able to produce far better program reporting requirements, but also better informatics back to the people that are delivering the care. So once you get data into a place, Tony, and this is not an example of what we plan to stand up, this is just a dummy slide, but you can present the data in a range of ways, and I guess the challenge for us now is for a more advanced solution like integrated care or an advanced program solution, we now need to be able to produce, the informatics back to the people that need them in a way that is suitable for them to use them. And this is just an example of where we're looking at, colour coding where a particular site, and these could be a site, it could be an individual person or a patient, has been performing across that time, and there are underlying metrics here that build up to a balanced position to say, well, this person or these sites in this case, are at low risk or at high risk. And I guess that's what we're trying to do with the patients going forward, is to say, well, who's under control, who isn't under control, where are the low-hanging fruit, we've got to get to these people, and then we need to know why they're actually in the red and be able to address that matter in a view that is more of a population health view rather than one at a time.
I see. So you're, by collating practice data at the Elicio level, at the repository level, you can present it back, slice and die, present it back in balanced dashboards like this, and alert us to problems that may be happening in our practice. You'll have the tools to analyse the data and present it back to us for our purposes. Colin, you mentioned CloudMed, Telstra CloudMed. I'm not familiar with that platform, but they'll be supporting Elicio. Do you want to tell us a bit more about Telstra CloudMed?
Yeah, well, CloudMed is a company that is owned by Telstra, so we refer to CloudMed broadly as Telstra Health, but that's the particular company. So this company has access to a range of software solutions that they use in their, their business, and we're not proposing to use all of these, that's for sure. But we know that we're selecting, I guess, with their help, a best of breed here to bring this solution apart into place. And certainly part of it will be spine, it will be, synchronising data across the systems, it will be, an electronic master patient index. These sort of things that are coming together to produce a solution fit for purpose for the needs that we see that the health system has. It'd be fair to say there's a lot of stock in the cupboard at Telstra Health, but we're not proposing to use all of it. And we're certainly not proposing that this solution, will compete with things like shared care platforms or even the existing data extraction tools. This can work in concert with those. It's not intended to replace them. And we know that, and a great step forward, we believe this year will be the release of Medical Directors MD Insights, which we believe is due for release quite in the near future. And MD Insights really is I guess the first population health tool that's going to be released by a mainstream vendor that will, I think, really start to step the market up in that regard. So we're not proposing to replicate those sort of things here. We're looking at the other, data integration needs and from that there will be obviously things that we can point back to a general practice or to a hospital or a pharmacy, but all of those things need to be developed through a program of activity, because it needs to satisfy the needs of that program activity, not necessarily just collect data and show, you know, dashboards back to people, because that's not what we see, how we see it working.
So thanks for that. We'll just dig into a little bit more than what Elicio does do, but I take it from what you said, it doesn't replace medical director and best practice on our desktops, but integrates with them. And we are familiar, Colin, with using our practice data and submitting correlated data every month to the qiCommunity portal, where it's benchmarked, and we get reports back on how our diabetes patients are going and how we're going COPD and how we're going with access. Using the portal system. Will it still, as a general practitioner, will we still be able to use it for those sort of quality improvement purposes?
Yeah, there'll be a relationship. At the first level, and we're just about to do some beta testing around phase 1. And the first level is to be able to collect data into the Elicio repository and to be able to produce what we call those the Australian Primary Care Collaborative quality and safety indicators, and they will feed into the Improvement Foundation portal. Now, that's not the only method of doing that. You know, certainly medical directors, MD Insights, will be able to deliver data to our portal, and also the Canning tool will, and we believe that other vendors are now looking at how they move forward with using the APCC quality and safety indicators as a national standard for, you know, looking at quality improvement data. So the data can come into the quality improvement portal in a range of ways, but yes, Elicio can also do that. But that's its the basic bread and butter, is to be able to get those indicators out. Then we're looking at level 2, is really into that concept of enrolling people into a particular program, also advanced population health analytics, subject to, of course, general practices and others, working with a support organisation that's willing to provide data for those purposes. So phase 1 is relatively entry level as business as usual for data and quality improvement indicators, but it will not replicate the data extraction tools. People can use the tool of their choice to undertake their local cleaning and you know, querying of the database. Elicio is intended to work at a level to integrate data across data sets and not replace those tools.
Okay. All right, and then so it does that from a general practice. What with you'll have your own connector or extraction tool of some sort to put in a general practice, and another one to put in a hospital, and one to put in a pharmacy, and you collect the data that they allow you to collect and integrate that. Is that the picture, Colin? Yeah,
that's exactly right, Tony. So there'll be what we're calling, you know, connectors or some software that will be installed, but it is very, you know, simple to use in that regard. It is effectively install the software, and then the software will run and do its work without, you know, human intervention, and then therefore, you know, there's not a, if you're using Elicio solely for, say, data submission, then that would occur in an automated way, as opposed to manually submitting it as through the current methods. But equally, you know, you could use the current methods to, you know, remain involved with the qiCommunity.
Yes, I'd like to just look at, you know, why it's different and how it affects us all. So, as a general practitioner, then, Colin, I think you've explained how we use it and how it's different from what we've previously used. It'll provide extraction automatically for quality improvement purposes to the QI portal. That's one function. What else will be different for GPs, Colin?
Well, for GPs, it really gets down to the local integration and other programs, you know, and they could be things like commissioned care programs where, you know, authorities are commissioning care and they might want to get, you know, better informatics back about that care. There's two things. One is you'd like to know the population at the general practice level that you're delivering the care to and be able to see how well that care is being delivered. but equally the funder would be looking for better information back around the commissioned care. At the general practice level too, it will be a lot easier to be able to have a particular general practitioner view rather than the whole of practice view. So you would be able to carve out your own patients if you wanted to do that through that enrolment process. So those things we see as adding value to the general practice. But it is really designed for integration and other program activity, not necessarily just looking at your data that is within your medical director or your best practice, etc.
So for local health district, local health network people or people managing hospitals, what's in it for them? What will they use Elicio for?
Well, if they're serious about integration, which is really where we see this heading, then they'll be able to use Elicio to bring together the data from the various data sets. Once it's into a repository like Telstra Health is developing for us, then you can actually perform more intelligent tasks with it. So the concept of even events, if this happens, then do this, is possible. So it could be possible to alert the general practitioner if something happens, like say a person arrives at the emergency department, is registered at the emergency department, so look, there's been a patient overnight at the emergency department. These sort of things all become possible, and it just depends on the local area. So in a local area where they have this completely solved and they have a fully integrated system and all this works like clockwork, then there probably isn't the need for this sort of product. But we don't believe that there are too many places like that in Australia, and they are all quite variable with regard to the sort of systems they use and certainly the way they're looking to try to integrate primary healthcare with the acute and other sectors. So we see this being a different solution for different regions, but the basic premise is the same. If you can get good quality data into a repository that has the sophistication and smarts to be able to deliver back the right solutions for the particular program of activity, then you'll get a better outcome.
So primary health networks would be another user that you would have in mind?
Well, ideally the primary health networks and the local area health networks, if not the states, would be working together on this, because it requires collaboration. And in the areas where we have worked with both the LHDs and the and/or HHSs and the PHNs, then there is a willingness to cooperate. There's no doubt about that. But what we're seeing is difficulty bringing these systems together, and each of these regions is a little bit different. But when you get down to the actual data that's collected across these systems, medical director and best practice are national systems, and some of the hospital systems are international systems, and they're relatively standard across their software suites. It's the variation within the local areas that is the problem, and therefore bringing it into one system that can actually access the data in an intelligent form, we can produce solutions back for that area's particular integrated care activity.
So Colin, there's some good questions coming, particularly about privacy and security, and we'll address them. Just interested, before we do, your roadmap. So can you tell us about the rollout of your tools, and for instance, when's the GP connectors, when do you expect them to start being utilised?
We're looking to beta test the connectors, commencing in November, and then we're also looking to concurrently start to plan. 2016. we met this November, Tony. Yeah. And that's, as I said, that's phase one. Get the connectors so we can get data into the repository, get the quality improvement indicators across, and that gives us, our stage one outcome. And then we're looking to design the first instance of stage two, where we're looking for, a site that's willing to integrate care, and that means that there has to be collaboration across the region. We can't go in and simply take data from databases without people's willingness to participate. And that willingness to participate needs to be at a range of levels. So firstly, we would need general practices, pharmacy, hospital, etc. But then where a particular patient may need to be enrolled, where we're sharing care or sharing data that requires patient consent, informed consent, then we need to get the informed consent from the people that are involved. Now, in our experience with the integrated care programs, is most of the people expect their data to be actually shared and are a bit sort of amused at why the health system isn't working in that way. So we don't believe there are any barriers apart from the administrative effort to go and get this to happen. We don't believe there are too many technical barriers here, albeit I know Telstra Health are working hard on this solution. I guess the harder part to me is the administrative effort to get all the players around the table and to achieve real collaboration.
So, and part of that, and one of the questions is about the engagement you have with local health districts and state health. They would have to come on board to realise the full potential of the system. What sort of contacts and feedback and time frame can we expect there?
Well, we've got a lot of very active discussion underway with groups, there's no doubt about that, and there's a lot of interest. We're yet to, I guess, formally sort of sign up any test site in this environment, albeit we have a couple of targets in mind. But, it goes out to other areas. People, even on this webinar, if they are in an area that is interested in integrating care, then we'd be more than happy to talk with them to satisfy any concerns they may have about the privacy and security of the system, because we believe that is more than well satisfied. And then it comes down to, well, how can we best deliver a solution back for the particular integration program that is actually being implemented in that area.
So, Colin, could I just check? So the vision is, as far as privacy goes, that patient collated practice level data, collated the practice, submitted with the practice's consent, as it is now, and that's not, data remains owned by the practice, is not distributed to funders or to government or for other purposes without the explicit permission of the practice. So that's practice level data. Is that correct?
Yeah, so there's two levels, Tony, just to clear that up. One is at phase one, the first level cut, we're still bringing to the repository patient level data, but that patient level data is brought to the repository in a way that protects the privacy of the individual record, so we cannot ascertain the individual's identity. Now, from those data, we can then compute the quality and safety indicators from those data. But where the region, for example, just say it's a PHN, is working with the general practices over population health data, then because it is the privacy is protected, they could use the population health data for needs assessment, etc., and other work, whilst also getting quality improvement indicators in a standardised way out. Once you go to level 2, where we're saying we actually want to start to identify the people, well, then we were looking for informed consent from people to be involved in that process. So even for, say, commissioned care, where we're not looking to identify the individual patients, we're looking to identify the fact that they are receiving say commissioned care for just say diabetes or CVD or chronic disease program. Well, then at an aggregated way, the person that is funding the commissioning, could look at two solutions. One is what do they provide back to the participants in the program by way of viewing their own data and comparing that across other participants in the program, but also to get data back on the outcomes of that commissioned care in a far richer way, but in a way that does not breach privacy.
I see. So, say we're running an integrated care program and we've all nominated patients that we want to manage with the hospital and local health district. We would get an individual consent for those patients, which would allow the hospital to share data with Elicio about individual patients and allow us to share data with the hospital about individual patients. So for when we've got a program focused on tracking individual patients in an identifiable way, then as one would expect, patient consent would be required for that. At the service level or the practice level, perhaps not so much so. That's the general principle. Would that be right, Colin?
Yes, it is. So certainly if they are going to share their data in a way that you can ascertain the identity, which is we intend to do that purposely, of course. I mean, we would need to get informed consent and the people would need to know how their data was going to be used and how the program would operate. The other challenge that we've put to Telstra is we want to vastly improve what we call the enrolment process. We want to make sure that the enrolment process, wherever possible, is actually undertaken electronically, and we maintain an audit trail of that electronically. So we're not trying to physically sign forms, at the general practice and get the general practitioner or the practice staff to undertake that load. We'd like to think that in today's environment, technology could add a lot to that process.
All right. Well, I think we've addressed a number of the privacy questions there about identifiability of patients, no, not without their consent. Practice data being shared with third parties, no, not without the practice's consent. The dashboards and other collated tools that practice of the health service can only be accessed by them unless they choose to share it with other people. Whatever it is, maybe they want to demonstrate how good they are. A couple of other questions, Colin. CommuCare, have you had any discussion with them about participating as a connector?
You mean CommuniCare?
Yeah.
Is that right, CommuniCare?
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, CommuniCare is a Telstra-owned product. So yes, we expect integration with CommuniCare.
All right. Good. And then is the data extracted in real time from the GP's desktop systems or from the hospital systems, or how do you or is it like a nightly upload, or is that going to be part of the roadmap?
It's going to be part of the roadmap. In theory, it can be very close to real time, but of course we've got to look at some practical issues around this. But we would, like to see this, in as close to real time as you really get. But I'm thinking it's more likely to be an overnight situation where we're looking at integrated care programs. But if we are looking at, say, these Stage 1 programs where we're looking really at quality improvement indicators and population health, well, that might be once a month.
Okay. And it's not a replacement, once again, not a replacement for current shared healthcare platforms or for the My Health record. That's not its intention.
No, absolutely not. And we plan to leverage, that work wherever we can. So for example, a person that's been discharged from a hospital, this is not replacing a discharge summary. The discharge summary needs to be done. We might, leverage the fact that that discharge summary is being done and uploaded as part of this process to obtain the data we require, for the integrated care program. But it's not intended to replace any of those processes whatsoever.
All right. You turned into dialect then on my system, but maybe that was just my system. Colin, I think our time is up. For practices or health services or PHNs who are interested in either participating in the early trials or learning more about Elicio, how do they get in contact with you?
Well, I can get in contact on email, is probably one of the easiest ways, or I'm happy to take phone calls, but through our website, we've got contact details there, and happy to hear from people that want to look at how they can be involved in any of the piloting. All
right. So in summary then, Colin, with Elicio, a new tool that will allow general practices to do their quality improvement work and to extend that to know more about their patients, what happens to them outside the practice, so tracking them through the health system. For hospitals and PHNs, a way to look at their practice populations, their area populations as a whole, and get a level of informatics and data that they haven't previously had by combining what they know about people in the hospital with what general practice knows about them and getting a snapshot that they can use for planning purposes and for quality improvement purposes in their area. And it will allow us to continue our quality improvement work, but to expand that beyond what we currently do. We'll take note of all the comments in the chat pane, and we'll send them out to participants as an FAQ in the following week. Colin, thanks very much, and thank you, Alison, and QI Community Central. Our next webinar will be in November, so we'll send you information about that soon. There'll be a valuation window open up when we close this session, and we're keen to have your further questions so we can explain the concepts further. Good on you. Thank you very much, Colin. Thank you, Alison. Thank you, all participants.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.